And for those of you who have been tracking and following along with this show, you know that Sundays are the day that I talk about spiritual intelligence. And spiritual intelligence is one of the most important intelligences. Well, frankly, every single one of them is. It's an intelligence that I actually feel pretty nervous to talk about right now. Spiritual intelligence is something that I was raised at my core to hold and honor. Just spiritual in general, not even, I say intelligence very delicately here because how I was raised wasn't necessarily with a true cultivation of intelligence surrounding the spirit, but it was much more so a regurgitation of what others believed around me. And today I'm going to share about my story, and I feel really compelled to share some elements around some spiritual things that are some values, elements, aspects of who I am that are probably some of the most important. And they are some of the very things that I have not shared with hardly anyone because I feel like the pursuit of this particular intelligence is like the turning of a book. It's the turning of a page, and it's continuously unfolding new things every single day. Every single morning that I pursue vertical alignment, I feel as though I'm learning something new about the divine, about God, about myself. And so to come forward and share something feels almost like this standing on a podium, a platform, and saying, this is what I believe. And that is terrifying to me because I have seen my life fall apart and others around me on a couple of occasions. And I just know that it's like the older I get, the more I realize how much I don't know. And I've heard many people older than me say that. And I'm very much so in the same line of thinking where I just am realizing how much I don't know. And so to share this, my story in regards to the spiritual intelligence side of things does feel rather daunting. I have shared a lot regarding my experience on the cultivation of my emotional intelligence. And frankly, I've gotten very familiar and comfortable with sharing around emotional growth, failure, weaknesses, learnings. And to do so around the spiritual feels highly uncomfortable. And I've had a pit in my stomach ever since I've felt compelled to talk about this. So I've done this one other time, and I'm going to do it again. I am actually going to pray for my own sake, and you're welcome to join me. And I'll resume here in just a minute, but I'm going to pray aloud. God, I feel so much like I'm supposed to share this, and I ask for your help right now. God, there's so much I don't know, and there's so much that I have yet to learn, so much that I don't understand, so many areas where I don't understand why there is just so much pain and so much hurt in this world. And equally, I feel so amazed that I get to be alive, and I feel so grateful. And so I just ask for your help as I share this. And I pray for new revelations, God, that as I'm being consistent to show up here on the Knowing Show every single day and process live rather than always giving these curated, perfect answers, which probably aren't perfect anyways. But God, I ask for your help as I'm seeking to move away from this perfectionist part of me that has continuously just chased me down throughout various parts of my life and really gotten in the way of relationships, gotten in the way of connection. And I want that part of me gone. And I just feel like even here in this moment, this is a way of doing that. And I have a lot to learn. So I ask for your help. Amen. So some backstory. The other week when I was at the Joe Dispenza event, I was talking with a friend around the purpose and value of our past, because so much of my own exploration of emotional intelligence actually is predicated on the knowing framework itself is predicated on 3 questions. Number one, who was I? Number two, who am I? And number three, who do I want to be? And this whole first question of who was I requires us to go into the past to understand how the past informs the present and how the past and present could potentially prevent our very potential from actualizing. And so until we really understand the past and the present, we could risk potentially never getting into all that we can be and never actually seeing the consummation of our own potential. And so in this work of understanding the past on an emotional level, I realize, even just as I'm sharing this now, how much I need to actually go back and understand the who was I in the spiritual regard, not just who was I in terms of how I was raised emotionally and how those narratives really impacted me on an emotional level that show up in the present. For example, one of the core emotional narratives that I shaped that has informed me today in the present that was shaped in my past was around emotions being a sign of weakness. And so that fundamentally prevented me from showing emotions in my relationships. So I needed to understand the moments and memories in the past, how they showed up in the present, and how they were effectively preventing me from me hitting my potential. And the kind of, when I say potential, it's not just my own ideal, but the ideal of, let's say, love and romantic love and platonic love. And I mean, I really lost my marriage as a result of emotional unhealth in both of us. And so to prevent that and to have the potential ideal surrounding love itself in terms of romantic relationship, I needed to undo the past narrative, how that showed up in the present, and completely rewire and reprogram my brain in that regard. And so as I was at this Joe Dispenza event this past week, so much of what he talks about is creating this new ideal, focusing on the future, and really bringing our full potential into actualization. But he talked so much about just moving away from the past. And there's something about the backstory that is so incredibly important, not just because we live on autopilot and default behaviors if we don't do the work, but also that's a part of who we are. I just really love and respect this whole concept of the backstory, because one, every single good movie, book has the backstory of the character, mapping out the context and the reason for the pain in the present moment to then be able to accomplish and get to the other side as the victor and as the hero. But if we don't understand the pain of the past and how that's showing up in the present, we'll never be able to truly even appreciate the reaching of the potential, the actualization, the fulfillment, the hallmark and pinnacle of the hero's journey. If all we see is where we start today and then ending tomorrow, we really miss so much of the picture. And so, and honestly, a third reason is that each one of us is so unique. And so if we were to strip away our past and solely focus on this ideal and this future version of us, we strip away so much of the beauty of what is. It's the truth that happened. And what book was it? It's on the tip of my brain. My best friend said I needed to read it. It's by Benjamin Hardy and Dan Sullivan. I can't remember. I'll remember at some point. But effectively, the concept is looking at our life from where we came to now, rather than just, okay, I want to get this future ideal and this is my starting point in the present moment. I want to get to this potential. Look at how far, The Gap in the Gain. That's the title of the book. I knew I would remember as I started talking about it. The Gap in the Gain is the title of this book that talks about effectively living in this gap or in this gain mindset. And so if we were to solely look at where we are today against our potential version of ourselves, we're looking at this massive gap of where we are today to that ideal. And it's like, man, how discouraging. I've got such a long way to go. However, if we look over our shoulder and we see where we are today against where we started, man, we've made it so far. Man, we have made so much progress. Look at the gain. And so if we ignore and just move away from our backstory and the context and the history that each one of us possesses, we will never live in the gain. We'll constantly be living in the gap of where we are today to where we want to get to. And so for those reasons, the backstory, the history is so incredibly important. And as I look at, the question of who was I, who am I, who do I want to be, specifically in regards to this spiritual aspect of life, it's incredibly important that we answer these questions not just on the emotional level. Who was I emotionally in childhood? How does that show up today? And then who do I want to be in that regard? But we do this on the spiritual level. And so as I look back on who was I grew up in a very Christian conservative household, and there was a lot of love there. My mom was a stay-at-home mom with 6 babies. And she had 6 kids under 11, and at one point 4 kids under 5, and she just is a hero. She's amazing. I don't know how she does it, or did it, I guess. And so she was a stay-at-home mom. My dad had he was the 3rd generation of our 100-year-old family company at the time, and still is. And growing up, it was just a really beautiful upbringing in so many ways, and I'm so incredibly grateful for that. And there were elements that have been challenging to overcome. For example, there were narratives spoken over me in both the spiritual and emotional sense that really shaped the way that I viewed myself and the way I viewed the world and God. And some of those have been the very things that I've needed to undo. When we talk about kind of undoing ourselves and the parts of us that need to die, so many of those parts are cultivated actually in childhood by the narratives that are handed to us by those around us, by religious systems, schools, even our teachers. I mean, if we think about how much time we spent with our teachers at school, they really raised us. And it's so important that we do the work to go back and look at those key caretakers in our life and analyze, who were they? What did they believe? And how did their belief systems translate into my own? And where did it corrode and corrupt mine, so that what I'm believing today actually isn't mine to begin with at all? It's really theirs. And so as I look back on some core beliefs and narratives around myself and the world and God, a lot of it had to do with me. My grandma had a prophecy when I think I wasn't even born yet. My grandma had this word and this picture, I guess, of how I was supposed to be like Mother Teresa to my family. And I think it was just to my family. I don't know if it extended beyond that, but she told my mom that because my mom was so overwhelmed at the thought of having a 4th child with her daughter under 5. I was born just a couple weeks after my sister turned 5. And my mom was very overwhelmed. And so when my grandma told her that, I just have this feeling like Christene is going to be like Mother Teresa to your family, my mom just felt this real tremendous sense of relief, which is so wonderful. And being told at 3 or 4 years old, you're like Mother Teresa, and she's a saint, and she's perfect, and she lives selflessly. That's a lot for such a little kid to understand, and they can't. They really can't understand it. And so then this narrative formed around me that I needed to effectively be perfect. I needed to be the caretaker and caregiver to my family, including even my parents. There was just an element of this deep-seated care that I think I naturally was born with, that was inherent. When we think about who was I, and really looking at this first step in the knowing framework, it's so important that we actually do the work to identify our nature versus our nurture. And so looking at my nature, who I was created and intended to be, there is an element that was very caring, which I really appreciate. And there was a significant emphasis in the nurture, which is be the caregiving, selfless type of person that can actually take care of our family and bridge us together, because you're supposed to be like Mother Teresa. And so these you're supposed tos and you shoulds are typically the things that kind of come in a form of narrative that we now take into the present. And so that concept of being like Mother Teresa and I should take care of my family really informed the way that I showed up to and with everyone that I was close with. And it kind of almost alienated me from them. There was an age gap between my older 3 siblings. And then there was also an age gap between my younger 2. I'm one of 6 kids. And that was really important for me, because I never actually really identified that semblance of just kind of quiet loneliness. And what we do then is when we're lonely, we outsource our loneliness and look for someone else to fill that need, and we fill that gap. And I effectively looked to my future ideal husband, who would be my prince and shining knight in white armor, to come and save me and come to know me and be the one to effectively affirm my worthiness and my place and my worthiness of being taken care of, because I spent my entire childhood taking care of others. And I think a lot of us, the more people I talk to at almost every single retreat, every single attendee. So the Knowing Retreat is a couple days, about 72-ish hours, where we spend a couple of days together. And I call it the boot camp of the soul. It is just, we do the deep work. We go in, we look at the past, we look at how it shows up in the present. And then we look at, okay, well, who can I be? Really shaping out our potential and the version of us that we actually can be, should we shed the old parts of us, the old selves that do need to die, because they're not actually ours at all. They're not our responsibility. They were handed to us. And now all we have to do is let go and say, actually, no, I'm going to kiss that goodbye. But thank you for how that served me. Because every single one of these old narratives protected and served us for a good amount of time. For example, I earned my place in the family by taking on this role. I felt love by giving care. It felt like a very mutual exchange. So if I cared for my family, I would receive love. And then add on to that this kind of quiet narrative of, oh, I'm just waiting for this man to come and save me, akin to all of the Disney movies. And then if we look at it from the man's perspective, let's say one of my brothers, perhaps, their role is to effectively go and save the woman. Well, then are their needs ever being met? Do they actually ever know how to express what they need, how they can feel cared for, what they need in terms of love and what they want? So effectively, these narratives of how you should act and how you should live when we're kids are just so incredibly important for us to examine, because they shape the way that we look at ourselves and others. And as I said, God. And one of the ways that another narrative really shaped my relationship with God was that the church that I was raised in talked a lot about how we were fundamentally unworthy of God's love. And it was only because of Jesus coming and dying on the cross that we have a place with God. And so there's this element that was very consistently taught around, I'm so unworthy. I'm so unworthy of God's love. Man, how grateful should I be, because I'm just a wretch. And even that beautiful, wonderful hymn, Amazing Grace, says, amazing grace that saved a wretch like me. And it just really drives home this point of how wretched and awful we are, what a worm we are. Like, that was even a phrase that was said in my church, was that we're worms apart from God's love. And so even now as I'm sharing this, I don't actually want to go down a theological route and road of whether or not that's accurate or not. Because regardless of whether that is true, the other side of that narrative is that if that is true, let's say Jesus did come and he did die on the cross and he did rise from the grave. Whether that's actually true metaphorically, or he actually physically came, the Son of God physically came, or metaphorically is the representation of this death and rebirth into life. Regardless, the other side of that is that we live so triumphantly and so loved with such a sense of worthiness. My gosh, look at how worthy I am that God loves me so much. Like he made me, and I am in his image, and I am his mirror. And how incredible is that? And that was never really taught. That was never really shared. It was like we stopped at the death, and we stopped, maybe he rose from the dead, metaphorically or physically. But we stopped at this, like, man, we should just be on our knees for the rest of our life, crying out to God, thanking him because we're so unworthy. And that was such a damaging narrative, because what ended up happening was that the majority of my marriage, I just felt this unworthiness for this man that I loved so much. And so he could never do any wrong. And I just had this entirely damaging complex around him, putting him on a pedestal where he could do no wrong, which is so, man, what a far place you have to fall if that's the case. And because he could do no wrong, I took all the blame. And that was just, I effectively, anytime there was ever a conflict, I robbed him of power because of my codependency, and I assumed all control for fixing the relationship rather than bringing equilibrium that were true partners. And so this element of this unworthiness complex founded in the church, showing up in the way I viewed God, ultimately showed up in the most important relationship outside of anything spiritual, but my most important physical relationship. And it was to my greatest demise and detriment. And I lost the very thing that I fought so hard for 8.5 years. And when my marriage ended, I just realized that how much I had lived and believed and told myself was wrong. And one of those things is categorically that we are unworthy. And so as I have been kind of, like I said at the very beginning of this, I feel like with each turn of a page, that is how truth is unfolding to me. And, this concept of knowing ourselves is so critically important, y'all. Like, what else is there better to do than to know who we were created to be, to fulfill on the mission we were given, and to love others so well as a result, to give from all that we have received. But we have to actually receive it first to then be able to give it. And so looking at how I was raised with this whole narrative of Mother Teresa and being this caring saint, I was constantly giving from a very depleted well because I had a core thesis of unworthiness. And so if I'm giving from this place of unworthiness, is what I'm giving actually really love? And I had to really go back to my marriage and analyze that. And I had to really square off with this woman I saw looking back at me in the mirror. I had to square off with my reflection. And I'm like, who am I? I espoused all these high ideals, and yet these high ideals of the church, of Christianity, of high morals actually blinded me. They served as just this piety that I hid behind to not see the truth that I'm not Mother Teresa, like that. And y'all, that's what a relief that is. Thank God there's only one Mother Teresa's. Thank God there's only one of you. Thank God there's only one of me. Yet if we never take the time to cultivate and come to know that person, come to know who we were created to be by God, we will only ever show up as mere replicas, as mere phantoms in this world. And this morning, I'm just outside of New York City on the Jersey side. I have this beautiful view of New York, and the skyline is just stunning. And I am moving through this knowing intensive with my client. We're going through knowing yourself as a brand, knowing your customer, knowing your business and your data, and just really doing a deep dive for about a 42-hour time together over last night through tomorrow midday. And they wanted to go to church. And so I went with them, and I walked into church, and I just had this very visceral reaction. It was so weird. I just felt so, I'm trying to think. I took a moment to consider. One of the things that I felt in that moment was how so many of the Christians that I encounter are living like that position that I talked about just a few minutes ago, where it's living your life in a place of surrender, kneeling, rather than standing at a place of power on the other side of life. They're kind of living in this death mindset, in this death position. And that's how I lived for 28 years of my life, without realizing that actually I have so much power because of who God says that I am. Not because of who my husband said that I was, not because of how the church said that I was, but because the God of the universe, the divine, the creator, made me, called me by name, called you by name. And that is what I believe. And there's so many parts of this that I'm still, actually, I was sitting in church and I was just writing out all of my questions. I have so many questions. I don't understand so many things. The things that I grew up believing, I just am like, I don't know. And And it's so okay that I have so many questions. And it also I was sitting there with all these people that look just like each other, that talk just like each other, and they're living in this defeatist mindset. And I don't want to say everyone, because I'm sure that there were actually the client that I'm with right now, they do not live that way, and they are powerhouse couple, and they have such an incredible business, and they're doing incredible things in the world, making real impact, and have such a big vision. And that is what the hallmark of living like a known healed person looks like. Someone who knows who they are created and called and designed to be. They know their potential and they're moving towards it. They're living in the gain from where they started to where they are today, with their eyes, yes, aware of their potential and where they want to head. They know what their ideal is, yet they live with this gain mindset of, look at how good God is. Look at how good life is. Look at how blessed and grateful I am, because even though there has been death and devastation, and my life isn't a quarter of as bad and painful as so many other people, yet I see people in third world countries that have the biggest smile on their face because they understand that the values are properly attributed to the people in their lives, to the divine, to realizing that material wealth, material gain is not what it's all about. It's the inner state. I use some languaging around this show, which is that legacy begins from within. Y'all, we're all creating, we're all painting a canvas that is our very lives. With every single paint stroke, every single day, we're adding more color to this beautiful painting. And when we look back at the end of our lives and we look back on this painting, we'll see the full picture. But for now, we don't realize how every single moment is of the utmost importance. And we're living so often blind, so often defeatist, as victims of our own story, rather than realizing that we're actually the ones who have the power to change it. And that is exciting. And that should change the entire way we show up in our lives. That should change the entire way we engage with our partners, our parents, our peers, our colleagues, our customers, our clients. Every single relationship on the horizontal should be shaped and defined by the strength of the vertical. And that's why vertical alignment, that's this practice that I do every single morning, is of such critical importance to me. This time is this sacred time set aside every single day to remember where I've come from, to live in the gain, to remember who I want to be, to remember my potential, to remember who I was created to be, so that I'm living in the full span of past, present, and potential. And then I get to decide who I'm going to be today. And it's all predicated on the truth. It's all predicated on, this is my little pink journal. My little pink journal holds my eulogy that I wrote when I turned 30. And I keep adding to it. And I keep including and embellishing. And I haven't changed it yet. I think that actually might be coming soon. But I haven't changed it, but I keep adding to it. Like, what are the things that I'm learning now that I want to incorporate into my life to continue to shape me? Man, I've been reading A Course in Miracles this year, and there's something that they talk about in terms of holding grievances that I've actually added to my eulogy just a couple months ago. And I'll just read it. Grievances have no hold on me, and I am free in regards to those around me, just as they are free with me. The reality is that if we're not living free, if we're not living in this position of power, if we're living in this defeatist, on our knees in a place of surrender, nobody is ever going to be free around us, because we're constantly going to have a noose around their neck. For so long as we're letting them be in the driver's seat of our lives, we'll constantly be pointing the finger of blame rather than looking at the four fingers back at us and not realizing that the driver's seat is actually our position of our lives. It's the whole hero of our story concept. We have to know the story that we're currently living. We have to know what our end goal is in terms of what we're striving for. Now, obviously, it's going to change. My story has changed more drastically than I could have ever imagined. And what a blessing it's proven to be. And so with us examining our story, with us examining the backstory of the past and how that has informed the present, and then considering the potential and all that can be, I want to dream bigger than I ever have dreamed. And I want to focus on that. Actually, this morning I had the vertical alignment. So this morning process, it can take as long as you want. My most powerful vertical alignments are usually about an hour. And this morning I gave my client, we're doing the Knowing Intensive right now, and this morning I gave my client a vertical alignment exercise, and I had them vision out exactly what they want in their business. They visioned out what it looked like. They visioned out their positions, their roles, who was there, the colors of the walls, every single part. And then after they visualized it, then they wrote down, I wish. And with every single sentence, they began with, I wish. And I actually found this exercise to be so helpful back in Paris, end of April. I realized that writing down, starting with I wish, really helped me uncover the truth about the past. And it also helps define the future. So this concept of I wish allows for us to go back historically to better understand our story and say, I wish that insert blank here. So for whatever memory that we're working to process through, for me in April and in Paris, I was really moving through aspects of my marriage. I never really had dove deep in terms of what and how it didn't pan out against what I had hoped for. And thus it wasn't allowing me to fully grieve. Even, right now in the vertical alignment, we're on day 10 and 11 of the 21-day alignment series. And we're talking about the emotional tunnel. Moving through every single emotion positions us in front of a tunnel that we have to move all the way through, lest we get trapped and stuck in the emotion. I have found this to be exponentially true in my life, that if I can just take a moment, anytime I feel a weird sensation in my stomach, if I can just take a moment and breathe into whatever that emotion that's arising, and then get to the other side, I'll realize what that is attributed to. It's like any good business. They know attribution of the money, attribution of the lead. But apart from knowing the attribution, identifying the source of that emotional sensation, that pain that's being triggered in us, we're going to blame something in the present that has roots in the past. And so we have to do the work to uncover our story. And this whole question of I wish allows me and you to go back to the past around a particular moment, move through the emotional tunnel so that we can get to the other side and say, I wish they never left. I wish you had remained loyal. I wish that I could have trusted you. I wish that I could have trusted me, because at the end of the day, so many of these roots in the past of a painful memory that we have in regards to a relationship, so often at the end of the day, we turn around and we look back and we see those four fingers pointing back at us, whether we were 7 or 17, 27, it's, I wish I had protected me, even though it was actually our caretaker's job to protect us in the first place. And so apart from doing this work, we will never let ourselves be free, much less anybody else. And so we have to do the work to go back and understand. This is the importance of story, is that it paints that beautiful picture. It paints a beautiful picture of seeing how far we've come, living in the gain. It allows for us to have proper attribution of pain, of allowing for the healing to come in. And ultimately, it allows for our stories that are so incredibly unique. In this Knowing Intensive, we're really unpacking a lot of stories about these two founders and how their unique experiences in their upbringing shaped and cultivated their worldview and their mindsets and the lens through which they view the world. And then how does that translate in the way that they want to run their business? And so for every single value that serves as the guardrails leading them towards the ideal in their business, the guardrails are deeply rooted in a story, in a core why, so that these values, when they explain them to their employees, when they explain them to their customers, they hold legs to stand on, so that when a value is pushed on, there's deep roots that allow for us to really cultivate real change in our lives, because there's a historical reference point. There's an attribution to a source about why emotional health is a core value of mine, why excellence deeply matters to me, and why I'm willing to fire clients if they're not emotionally healthy, because I've lost the most important relationship in my life I lost because of it. And so because of that, this has to be something that is of the highest, most honored value in my life. And I have to be willing to make drastic changes if it's not being honored, if it's not being valued. So with that, in terms of spiritual intelligence and in terms of how we really come to understand, what do I believe today, here in this present moment? I love that analogy this morning of like, with every new turn of the page, I'm learning something new. And I'm learning things that maybe don't completely contradict previous learnings and past pages, but kind of, they're adding just so much nuance. One of my biggest lessons in my life was realizing that there is no black and white. There is no dogma. And even saying there is no, that is black and white. So I take that back to an extent. I had to learn to live in the gray. I had to learn. My therapist told me this when my husband was trying to decide if he was going to stay or not. He was like, your husband can love you and leave you. And that was deeply confusing. And so this childish mind that I had never, I say childish because I had never cultivated nuance. And actually, Dmitry Smirnov, he was on the Knowing Show and on the Knowing podcast the other month. But we had a conversation on the Knowing podcast, and I'll include the link to that conversation here. We had a conversation where he said that he really understood emotional maturity when someone effectively explained it as the ability to hold two seemingly conflicting truths. So the fact that your parent could love you and leave, that my husband could love me and leave. And whether they loved us or not, who's to say, right? We can't say, but what we do know is that they left. And so with all of that, with examining the truth and coming to know what is, allowing for nuance and allowing for gray, for certain things to have been so meaningful, so deep and healing in a season, and then coming to this point of, I actually don't know if that's right for me anymore. There was a time and season where what I needed was to literally escape from everyone. I had lived such a codependent life where I was so horizontally fixated on everyone and everything around me outside of me, where they informed my value system, that I had to kind of strip away everyone and everything, go dark, and go into what I called the wilderness, the dark place of the soul, and allow for the cultivation, the building, the newness of life after death, so that who I was becoming was actually who I was created to be, rather than a mere replica and phantom of everyone around me. Next week, I'm going to talk about the thing that I said was deeply personal. I think I've reached my time limit for today. Y'all, this pursuit of spiritual intelligence is incredibly important. Just doing the work to understand our emotional intelligence and gaining insight into what has happened on the emotional landscape in terms of past, present, and potential is so deeply important. And that's what I spent the last couple of years pursuing. And this year, I'm really allowing for the other two intelligences, the physical intelligence and the spiritual intelligence, to take a forefront. Actually, really, 2024 was a massive year for me in terms of cultivating spiritual intelligence. And right this year, 2025, is really more so focused on the physical. But I think that if we really give ourselves the time and space every single morning to cultivate ourselves, we'll be cultivating each intelligence. And depending on the day, depending on the season, a different intelligence will take the forefront. But y'all, we have to be cultivating it. Otherwise, everything that is horizontal will cultivate us, and we will end up, apart from our intention, our subconscious will be in the place of power and allowing everything external to sit and hold the seat of power in our lives. Because if our subconscious isn't being fed with intention by us, by the ones that we were initially created to be in the first place, we cannot help but live as a replica, as a mirror, as a phantom of everyone and everything around us. And so this cultivation during this time of vertical alignment every morning is so important. I'm going to drop the link to it once again, 21 days of free vertical alignments, because this is the thing that so many people have asked for, and it's the thing that has radically changed my life. So with that, I hope you have a wonderful Sunday, and I hope that you do take time to cultivate yourself, to set aside even just 10 minutes every morning. It's never too late to start, and tomorrow's Monday. And as my